Good evening. Let me take you to a place that, on its surface, feels very routine. Brussels. A NATO headquarters meeting room that has seen decades of defense ministers pass through it, sit at the same tables, speak into the same microphones, and participate in a ritual that is, by design, predictable. This is where allied defense ministers gather to talk about collective security. It is not flashy. It is not dramatic. It is procedural, structured, and deeply symbolic. And that is precisely why what is not happening there on February 12th matters. According to sources cited by Reuters, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is not expected to attend the NATO defense ministers' meeting scheduled for that day in Brussels. No dramatic announcement, no formal explanation, just an absence. And this absence is not happening in isolation. It follows another one. In December, Secretary of State Marco Rubio skipped a NATO foreign ministers meeting, 2 high-level meetings, 2 senior Trump administration officials, 2 consecutive absences, and no publicly provided reason for either. Now, let's slow this down, because this is not about personalities. It is not about scheduling conflicts we can point to, and it is not about behind-the-scenes motivations we can speculate about. We are going to stay strictly with what is known. Reuters reports that no reason was provided for Hegseth's planned absence. Pentagon representatives declined immediate comment. NATO representatives also declined immediate comment. That is the full extent of what is officially said. And sometimes, silence is the loudest part of the message. The meeting itself is a standard gathering of NATO defense ministers. These meetings exist to coordinate policy, align military planning, and reaffirm commitments among allies. Attendance by the United States Defense Secretary has historically been the norm. The U.S. is not just another member, it is the alliance's largest military contributor. Its presence carries weight. Its absence is noticed. This upcoming meeting in Brussels is scheduled for February 12th. That date matters only because it places the event squarely within the early period of the Trump administration's second term, a time when allies are already watching closely, listening carefully, and frankly, counting who shows up. Now, Reuters places this development within a broader context that is already defined, not imagined. Transatlantic relations under President Donald Trump have been described as strained. That is not a judgment. That is a characterization grounded in observable diplomatic dynamics. The administration's posture toward Europe has been different, more transactional, more conditional, and this is reflected in official policy documents. Reuters notes that the Trump administration's new national defense strategy signals a shift, a move toward more limited U.S. security support in Europe, and an explicit urging of European allies to assume greater responsibility for their own defense. Again, that is not interpretation. That is what the document says. So when the defense secretary does not attend a NATO defense ministers meeting and no explanation is offered, it lands inside that existing framework. It does not create the framework, it fits into it. 1 absence might be dismissed as logistical. 2 begin to look like a pattern, especially when they occur at the highest levels of diplomatic and defense engagement, especially when they involve NATO, and especially when they come at a moment already defined by recalibration. There is a line that sometimes comes to mind in moments like this, a very simple one. It's not the words that linger. It's the quiet. That quiet is what allies are left with here. No statement, no clarification, just the empty chair. Now, to be very clear, Reuters does not report any cancellation of U.S. participation at lower levels. There is no indication that the United States is withdrawing from NATO. There is no announcement of a policy rupture. There is no declaration of intent attached to this absence, and we cannot add one. What we can do is observe and place this development where it belongs, inside a documented shift in U.S. defense strategy, inside a moment of already strained transatlantic relations, inside a sequence where this is the second time in a short span that a senior U.S. official has not attended a key NATO meeting. The December meeting missed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio was a NATO foreign ministers meeting. The February meeting is a NATO defense ministers meeting. Different portfolios, same alliance, same pattern of absence, and again, no reason provided. This is the part where, as a viewer, you might expect explanation to follow, but it does not. Not yet. And that absence of explanation is itself part of the factual record. Reuters makes a point of noting it. Pentagon and NATO representatives declined immediate comment. That is not background, that is the foreground. And so we are left at this stage with a series of facts that do not explain themselves. They simply sit there. A scheduled meeting in Brussels. A defense secretary not expected to attend. A previous absence by the Secretary of State. A national defense strategy that reorients U.S. commitments in Europe. And allies watching all of it unfold in real time. There is another line that fits here, short, spoken, and heavy in its simplicity. Sometimes the seat tells the whole tale. We are still at the beginning of this. This is the setup, the context. The moment before interpretation, before reaction, before consequence. What matters now is understanding exactly what has happened and what has not. Nothing more. Nothing less. So let's stay right here with what the record actually shows. Because once you strip away the assumptions, once you remove the temptation to read between lines that have not been written, what you are left with is something very precise. Reuters reports that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is not expected to attend the NATO defense ministers' meeting in Brussels on February 12th. That is the fact. Not may not. Not considering skipping. Not has canceled. Not expected to attend. Those words matter. They are careful. They are restrained. And they are deliberate. The report goes on to say that this would mark the second consecutive Trump administration official to skip a high-level NATO gathering. That sequence is important. In December, Secretary of State Marco Rubio did not attend a NATO foreign ministers meeting. That meeting happened. The absence occurred. And again, no reason was publicly provided. This is not a case where the explanation exists and has simply been overlooked. Reuters explicitly notes that no reason was given for Hegseth's planned absence, and that both the Pentagon and NATO declined immediate comment. That is the entirety of the official response, or more accurately, the absence of one. Now let's talk about the meetings themselves because their roles are specific. A NATO foreign ministers meeting is where alliance members discuss diplomatic alignment, political coordination, and foreign policy priorities. A NATO defense ministers meeting focuses on military posture, defense planning, and operational readiness. They are not interchangeable. They are complementary. And attendance by the United States at both levels has historically been central to how NATO functions. Again, not because of symbolism alone, but because of structure. The United States is a foundational member of the alliance. Its military capacity is integral to NATO's deterrence posture. Its participation is woven into how these meetings work. So when Reuters reports that 2 different U.S. cabinet-level officials have skipped 2 different NATO ministerial meetings, that fact stands on its own. It does not require embellishment. It does not require inference. It simply exists. And it exists in a very specific environment. Reuters places this development amid what it describes as already strained transatlantic relations under President Donald Trump. That phrase is not casual. It reflects an ongoing state of affairs that predates this particular meeting. The Trump administration's relationship with European allies has been defined by tension around burden sharing, defense spending, and the scope of U.S. commitments. That context is not added here for drama. It is added because it is already present. And then there is the national defense strategy. Reuters notes that the Trump administration's new national defense strategy reflects a shift toward more limited U.S. security support in Europe, and an urging of allies to assume greater responsibility. That language is from the document itself. It is official policy. It is written. It is published. It is not speculative. So when you line these elements up, what you see is not a contradiction. It is alignment. Absences at high-level NATO meetings occurring alongside a documented strategic shift regarding U.S. security support in Europe. Again, we are not assigning motive. We are not asserting intent beyond what is written. We are simply noting that these facts occupy the same space, and that space matters. Now, one of the most striking elements of the Reuters reporting is how much of it is defined by what is not said. No explanation for Hegseth's absence. No explanation for Rubio's absence, no immediate comment from the Pentagon, no immediate comment from NATO. That silence is not filled in by the article, it is left intact. And that is a choice grounded in journalistic restraint. Because adding explanation where none exists would change the meaning. So instead, Reuters documents the reaction, or lack thereof, and leaves the reader with a clear understanding of the boundaries of knowledge. This is what we know. This is what we do not, and nothing more. It is also important to note what the article does not report. It does not report that the meeting has been downgraded. It does not report that the United States will not be represented at all. It does not report any formal dispute between the US and NATO over this meeting. It does not report any official complaint from allies. Those absences matter just as much as the ones we are discussing, because they reinforce that this moment is defined by omission, not confrontation, by absence, not announcement, and that creates a very specific dynamic. In diplomacy, especially at this level, presence is part of the language. Attendance communicates engagement. Absence communicates something else, not necessarily rejection, not necessarily withdrawal, but something different, something that requires attention, and that is why this is being reported, not because it is explosive, but because it is incremental, and incremental changes in long-standing alliances are often the most consequential. There is a quiet line that captures this feeling. Short, measured, and heavy with implication. Nothing was said. And yet, everything shifted. Now let's bring this back to February 12th, because that date is still ahead. Reuters reports what is expected, based on sources. It is not reporting a completed event. That distinction is important. This is about anticipated absence, not a concluded one. But the expectation itself is newsworthy because it comes from informed sources and fits an emerging pattern. And because it has not been contradicted by any official statement. If there were an error here, if attendance were expected after all, that would be the moment for comment. But instead, there is none. And so the expectation stands. This is the second time Reuters has documented such an absence during the Trump administration, and it situates that documentation within a broader strategic shift that is already on the record. That is the narrative arc, such as it is. No embellishment, no projection, just alignment of facts. And this is where the discipline of this kind of reporting becomes visible. Because the temptation, always, is to go further. To say what this means. To predict how allies will react. To speculate about internal deliberations. But none of that is in the article. So none of that belongs here. What belongs here is precision, and clarity, and respect for the boundary between fact and assumption. There is one more line that feels appropriate here, spoken softly, almost as an aside. When the pattern repeats, people begin to notice. That is where we are. At the point of noticing, not concluding, not declaring, just noticing. The meetings, the absences, the silence, the strategy document. All of it coexisting in the same moment, and that is where we pause, right before consequence, right before response, right before the next step. So this is where we land, not at a revelation, not at a declaration, but at the edge of a moment that is defined almost entirely by restraint, by what is present, and by what is not. On February 12th, a NATO defense ministers meeting is scheduled to take place in Brussels. According to Reuters, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is not expected to attend. No explanation has been provided. Pentagon representatives declined immediate comment. NATO representatives declined immediate comment. That remains the complete official record. This follows a similar development in December, when Secretary of State Marco Rubio did not attend a NATO foreign ministers meeting. Again, no publicly provided reason. Again, no immediate comment. 2 meetings, 2 senior officials, 2 absences, and no formal explanation attached to either. Those facts do not move. They do not expand. They do not imply more than what they are. They simply remain, and they remain within a broader environment that is already well defined. Reuters situates these developments amid strained transatlantic relations under President Donald Trump. That strain is not new. It is not sudden. It has been visible through policy positions, public statements, and official documents. Most notably, the Trump administration's new national defense strategy. That document reflects a shift toward more limited U.S. security support in Europe, and it urges European allies to assume greater responsibility for their own defense. Those are not interpretations. Those are descriptions of what the strategy states. And when you place that strategy alongside the absences from high-level NATO meetings, you are not creating a narrative. You are observing alignment. The administration's stated policy direction exists, the absences exist, the silence exists, and all three occupy the same moment in time. What Reuters does not do is fill in the gaps. It does not attribute motive. It does not describe internal debates. It does not speculate about future consequences. It documents, and then it stops. That restraint is important, because in moments like this, clarity comes not from amplification, but from discipline, from saying only what can be said, from resisting the urge to draw conclusions that have not yet been made explicit. So what does this leave us with? It leaves us with a NATO meeting proceeding without the expected presence of the U.S. Defense Secretary. It leaves us with allies who are accustomed to U.S. participation at this level. It leaves us with a strategic document that calls for a rebalancing of responsibilities. And it leaves us with silence from the institutions that might otherwise explain. That silence does not accuse, it does not reassure, it simply exists. And in diplomacy, existence alone can carry meaning, not declared meaning, not confirmed meaning, but weight. There is a line that feels right here, spoken plainly, almost gently. The room remembers who isn't there. That is the nature of these gatherings. They are designed to be steady, predictable, routine. And so any deviation from that routine is noticed precisely because of how stable the structure usually is. This is not about disruption. It is about absence within continuity. And that is why it matters. Not because it breaks something, but because it changes the shape of the familiar. Now, one more time, it is important to be clear about the boundaries of what we know. Reuters does not report that the United States is disengaging from NATO. It does not report that the alliance is fracturing. It does not report that allies have issued formal responses or objections. It does not report that this absence represents a formal policy shift beyond what is already written in the National Defense Strategy. Those things are not part of the record, so they do not belong here. What belongs here is a careful accounting of dates, of meetings, of attendance, of official statements, and of the absence of those statements. The February 12th meeting has not yet happened, but the expectation of non-attendance has been reported, and it has been reported because it fits a pattern that has already emerged. That pattern is defined not by confrontation, but by distance, not by speeches, but by silence, not by declarations, but by absence. And in international alliances, especially ones built on shared expectations, those signals matter. They matter not because they tell us everything, but because they tell us something. Even if that something is simply that a change is underway and it is being expressed quietly. There is no dramatic ending here, no sudden turn, no closing argument. Just a moment frozen in its own precision. A defense ministers' meeting in Brussels. A U.S. Defense Secretary not expected to attend. A previous absence by the Secretary of State. A strategy document urging allies to do more. And a set of institutions choosing, at least for now, not to explain further. That is where we stop. Not because the issue is resolved, but because the facts, as reported, end here. And until something is said or done or changed, this is the full picture. Measured, contained, and still unfolding.